welcome to the Dots and Bridges Thought Leadership Consortium. My name's Pete Tseronis, a self-proclaimed dot connector, a relationship builder, in addition to being the founder and CEO of my company, Dots and Bridges, where pretty much that's what we like to do is create some light bulb moments, connect a few dots, and maybe discuss how those relationship bridges require trust and a lot of cultivation. The consortium understands and appreciates and values how human spirit, curiosity, and passion are key ingredients that can transform business operations and culture. As such, we're honored today to feature my colleague, Mr. Nick Andersen, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the United States Department of Energy within the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. It's a mouthful, also known as CESER. Nick's a thought leader, a change agent, a global influencer who understands the technology, humanity, and culture intersection, and we will talk a lot about that today. Nick, I'm going to brag about you a little bit with some of your background, but I hope that intro sort of tells a little bit of a story of where you are today.
Yeah, you know what? You barely even had to take a breath after that monstrous mouthful of title and organization, everything else. So you get a gold star right off the bat.
I like that. So let me continue with some of your awesomeness. Folks, the CESER mission is to, quote, maintain unique and sector-wide situational awareness, to discover and mitigate vulnerabilities and cyber threats, to orchestrate response and recovery operations through capacity building, partnerships, research, and information sharing, to safeguard against all hazards and protect our nation's energy system. A mouthful, but what an incredible mission. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the programs that our colleague, Mr. Nick Andersen, is leading and has led. Prior to joining DOE, Nick served in the White House Office of Management and Budget as the Federal Cybersecurity Lead and Senior Cybersecurity Advisor to the Federal Chief Information Officer. He led OMB cyber teams and was responsible for so much policy development, but also compliance and implementation thereof. Served also as a Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Vermont. Awfully impressive, has that state, local, as well as federal DNA, and he was appointed to lead myriad state efforts pertaining to the security and protection of data and security compliance activities. Prior to this, as a senior executive and senior intelligence officer, he served as the Chief Information Officer for Navy Intelligence and was the head of the Office of Intelligence Surveillance and Reconnaissance Systems and Technologies for the U.S. Coast Guard. And again, most importantly, thank you for your service in advance. He served on active duty with the U.S. Marine Corps. At the end of the day, the guy's highly educated. He's worked and serves in many capacities with nonprofits as a cyber committee member for AFCEA International, as well as a board of advisors member for the Cybersecurity Forum Initiative. But again, he's worn many hats. His education is phenomenal. Got a little University of Michigan, Western Governors University, BS in IT management, and an MS in information security and assurance. So there you have it, folks. This guy's an incredible pedigree, and I like to say he looks maybe 30, maybe even in his 20s, but he's really 80, but we're kidding. He's not. He's just a seasoned, amazing thought leader, and we're really excited to have you here, Nick. So with that, Nick, tell us something about CESER, your passion for public service right out of the box that's been contributing to your formation and why you're so passionate about federal government stewardship.
Yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate it, and thank you for the intro. You know, the one plug I'll make for public service is obviously you can select those terrific health insurance plans that will allow you for the Botox for the 12-year-old face perpetually. So there are some perks to public service, but you know, in all seriousness, it's public service provides us the opportunity, particularly in this space. When we're talking about critical infrastructure, we're talking about things like energy. When we refer to the tri-sector, we're talking about those apex critical infrastructure sectors, which have so many cascading and codependent impacts upon one another. Telecommunications, finance, and energy. When we're focused on those are the types of things that have that tangible impact on our neighbors. Mm-hmm. That's not, defense missions are near and dear to my heart. Like you said, I started out on active duty in the Marine Corps. I've served overseas. I've served in a lot of different locations supporting defense and intelligence missions. But for a lot of Americans, that's sort of far off, an imaginary world, far removed. It's not affecting them in a tangible way in their real lives right here and now. When I was working, as the CISO for the state, I could be standing in line at the grocery store. And if we were working something that was an active case, we had a cyber incident, we had something that we were dealing with that was the issue of the day. That was something I could turn around. I could talk to a neighbor in the line at the grocery store, and it was something that impacted them, or it impacted a friend, or it impacted a family member. That's the opportunity that public service really gives to all of us. It gives us that opportunity to continue to make a positive impact within our communities. And when we're talking about critical infrastructure in particular, this is the stuff that our livelihood is made of. This is the stuff that civilization is made of. It really underpins our society. Without it, we have so many elements where people just sort of assume that it's going to be there. We have business owners that go and build new buildings to bring commerce into a local area. We have home builders that throw up new developments. The question isn't, is energy going to be there to support this new homeowner? Is energy going to be here to support my business? It's just sort of assumed that it's there. So we have to safeguard against those potential threats to underpin like key elements that people have come to depend upon within our society.
Yeah, no, well said. And thank you for teeing that up. I'm going to remind our folks that in lieu of having some pop-ups, if you remember back in the day of MTV, where we're going to say an acronym or two, please do some research on not just at energy.gov and look for the CESER organization and read about the incredible mission that we'll get into. But Nick, you mentioned critical infrastructure. Folks, there are 16 sectors that, as Nick pointed out, are the water we drink, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the planes, trains, and automobiles that we ride in. These are the things. This is humanity, and how technology underpins those sectors is a space that I know, Nick, you're very passionate about. Maritime, we'll talk a little bit about, but think about those sectors, folks. And what Nick and I will hopefully share today is a bit about how technology is helping accelerate innovation in that space, Internet of Things, industrial Internet of Things, but also mitigating risk because the threat landscape is clearly grown. So you'll hear 16 sectors. You might hear about the 55 national critical functions that are aligned. And Nick, you've been wonderful over the years helping me understand a bit more about, sort of the story around industrial control systems. So thank you for that. So Nick, let's go there. CESER, its mission, it's not been around for decades. Can you talk a little bit about how it's grown as an organization and its role, not just in DOE, but across government and with the energy, or should we say critical infrastructure sectors?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so you're absolutely right. While the department is much older, and while the department serves a function that goes back to, I think when people are if they go to energy.gov and they look at the history of the department, it really has a very interesting story. It goes back to, tracing its roots and its lineage of some of its missions back to the Manhattan Project and what was being done with the Atomic Energy Commission. But I will not derail everybody with a History Channel special on the Department of Energy. CESER, more recently, was formed a little more than 2 years ago. Secretary Perry prioritized this as an initiative to take on and to formulate this new office, trying to bring together where within the applied energy space, we have offices that are focused on nuclear energy, electricity, energy efficiency, and renewable energy, and fossil energy. We have those kind of focus as horizontals. We want to have something, as verticals. We want to have a horizontally focused risk and hazards mission borne by one office to bring together cybersecurity, energy security writ large, and emergency response. So when you think about CESER, CESER's mission is really to strengthen and improve the security of the U.S. energy infrastructure against all hazards. Cyber gets a lot of play, particularly right now with the ongoing incidents in the press. But we're really focused on hazards, whether they're man-made or they're natural. We had just a tremendous amount of activity over the course of just the last 12 months, starting with earthquakes in Puerto Rico in January to a historic Atlantic storm season, a historic wildfire season, COVID-19 and pandemic response support to the energy sector. We've had ice storms across the Midwest. We've had derechos, hitting as well. Derechos in Iowa, ice storms in Oklahoma. Just a tremendous amount of natural hazards that have been born have had significant impacts on local communities and our energy infrastructure. Mm-hmm. We're able to use technology here within CESER to provide a level and a degree of situational awareness that allows us to be the good government partners to provide for the surging of federal resources, to provide for the coordination across regulated entities, to provide for the coordination with other stakeholders in the federal family like FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, where it's really important for us to be, much like you here. It's in our interest to be the connector. That's really what we have to do. We have to try to function as a connective tissue where we have such a significant amount of the critical infrastructure, in particular with energy, that's owned and operated by the private sector. We really have to partner very, very closely to work collaboratively with electricity and oil and natural gas subsectors, kind of bring some of these solutions to bear. Energy security is critical for so many reasons. It's essential to our way of life, our economic and national security, and we keep trying to push this narrative that energy security really is national security.
Yes.
When you consider how many of those other critical infrastructure sectors that you mentioned depend on energy, it's easy to see why widespread disruption to energy critical infrastructure can affect hospitals. It's going to affect water and those pumping stations being able to work. It's obviously going to affect transportation and emergency services, the financial sector, and government operations as a whole. It temporarily cripples local communities when energy is not available. So if you think, gosh, we have such a resilient system in place.
Yeah, well, I like that you mentioned the word resilient. I like to say that we've had an awfully reliable network of networks, which is what I think the grid is often defined as, and it really is. And again, folks, go look at the power grid and see how complex the generation, transmission, and distribution networks are. And that's, the utilities. You hear that, Nick, you mentioned it's not just electricity, it's oil, natural gas, there's telecommunication, there's water utilities. So I think you just did an incredible articulation of just how complex, but also it just makes sense that energy without power, a lot of what we do and take for granted, which I'm not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent, but I flip a switch on, I want to see electricity. When it doesn't work, you mentioned man-made, physical, we'll get into cyber physical a bit, but folks, think about what Nick's is saying here, and that is we just assume it works. And when it doesn't, loss of life could ensue. Think Katrina, think Superstorm Sandy, think Puerto Rico, and it's just those things happen, and we want to build a much more resilient network of networks. Nick, I will go right into a program or two because that background you provided really spoke to the situational awareness that we need, not just in the energy department, but with folks at the places like FEMA, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, but also the owners and operators, which is industry. When I think of CESER, and I know of a couple programs that really make me feel good as a taxpayer, the Citrix, Cyber Testing for Resilient, I'm reading off my notes here, Cyber Testing for Resilient Industrial Control Systems, Citrix, kind of a cool acronym. And then the Consequence-Driven Cyber-Informed Engineering, CCE programs. Can you share with folks why those programs were developed, the partnerships with the Idaho National Lab in this case as well, and what folks should feel really good about in terms of having those programs in our government and private sector today?
Yeah, sure thing. So I mean, the national labs that, just to be completely honest, until I came to the department, a little more than a year ago, I was largely unfamiliar with just the fantastic resource that our national labs are. I mean, they're really the jewel of our nation's R&D efforts, and they are so central to things that we take for granted, whether it is additive manufacturing, materials research, research for areas that we're talking about here, critical infrastructure, resilience, and cybersecurity issues. They're just absolutely essential to so many of those elements. So we were able to partner with the two elements that you mentioned in particular, Citrix and CCE. Those are partnerships that we drive with the Idaho National Lab, and with Citrix, it's a consortium of labs that's led by Idaho National Lab. So we really get the benefit of all of those within our scientific lab footprint. But CCE is our consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering approach, and CCE is really meant to be a methodology focused on securing the nation's critical infrastructure systems that starts with the assumption that if critical infrastructure is targeted by a skilled and determined adversary, that targeted operation can and will be sabotaged within critical infrastructure. So a well-resourced adversary, given enough time and enough runway, is going to be successful. As that methodology, though, tries to get critical infrastructure owners and operators to really focus on what's the bottom line here. What are their most critical functions? How do we evaluate those complex systems? How do we use the methodologies that an adversary could use to compromise those most critical functions? And then how do we just go and apply proven engineering, protection, and mitigation strategies in order to isolate and protect those most critical assets? I mean, this was really sort of one of the, the seminal work that came up, from Mike Asante, before he passed.
Great man, a great man.
And he did so much for this community, and really CCE is really based largely on that work that he pulled together, kind of pull the community around to thinking in this way. We can't 100% harden everything. We can't 100% secure everything. But when we think like an adversary, and we think in this, again, consequence-driven, focusing on the consequences of those most complex systems, cyber-informed engineering concepts, we can really start to make a lot of progress against some of these tougher problems and make sure that, like we said earlier, that you're resilient to the potential for disruptions.
Yeah, no, Nick, thank you. And shout out, obviously, to Mike Asante. I had the pleasure of knowing Mike, and I didn't realize who Mike was when I first met him. And then I realized, and, amazing individual, and one that we miss, but we feel his presence in the world today. So thank you for mentioning him. I want to go now to maybe something that's practical for our audience. And I think of as you've shared with me, critical infrastructure. People may go, the energy sector. Well, where is it? Well, I'm like, well, look at the substations and the wires when you're driving. Autonomous vehicles, transportation. Hey, a car on wheels, it's a robot. I get it. Smart street lights, sensors on. But maritime transport is something that I know you care about, the transport of goods or people via waterways. Can you share an example or exemplar or two of how some of the programs that create this situational awareness are helping create that resilient sector? Because there's two reasons for this. One, we have a lot of folks who watch the show and participate and want to sell to the government. And in a crowded and clouded market with so much technology, everybody thinks they have the silver bullet. I say technology is not the problem. The question is, how does that technology support the mission? In this case, it could be maritime. And I just think it's important maybe to hear from you how technology due diligence is so critical. And then also applying that technology to a mission, and whether it's energy, agriculture, food, healthcare, is so significant. Do you have an exemplar or two you can speak to?
Oh gosh. So let me touch on maritime for just a second. If I start rambling and get too far off track, you just tell me. Maritime is important to us for a couple of different reasons. So again, kind of harkening back to our mission of securing critical energy infrastructure from all threats, man-made or physical, and including cyber threats. We have to look at, the ports and shipping industry and look at the maritime nexus here. In 2018, I believe port and shipping was responsible for it's either 26 or 28% of U.S. GDP. I mean, there's no question that protecting the maritime domain is critical to supporting our economic security, our economic prosperity over the long term, and kind of connecting our economy to the global market. And we saw just how sensitive, in the spring when we saw the height of the COVID-19 supply chain disruptions, just how fragile that supply chain ecosystem can be. So when we start to think about the increasing interdependencies brought on by technology, with the private sector, our international partners, academia, and all these levels of government, we really have to take opportunities to collaborate and to work together to share best practices, to facilitate information sharing, and to focus on these critical national security issues, because it has a national level, international strategic impact, but it also has a really, really critical local impact to these communities and to manufacturing segments and to producers of goods, to receivers and sellers of goods, in a way that is largely overlooked with just how much work is being done within the maritime space. I believe, and I'm quoting off the top of my head, so I may be a little wrong, but it's around 40% of maritime traffic is transporting an energy product. So the energy industry relies heavily on the maritime transportation system and its associated infrastructure for both business and sort of daily mission operations. So when we start thinking again, about energy security and its ties with national security, there's that critical dependence with maritime transportation to be able to safeguard against major economic losses. Now, when you look at things like the 2019 Worldwide Threat Assessment that was provided by the Director of National Intelligence, and people can go look it up online. They can watch the video of the major IC element heads sitting there briefing the Hill. It codified publicly China and Russia's ability to temporarily disrupt critical infrastructure targeted through cyberspace operations. Now, we take a look at how that can affect, the maritime environment, the maritime industry. If you look at the NotPetya malware is probably a really, really good notable example of how Russian cyberspace operations affected the maritime environment. I mean, it caused, I think it's $10 billion in damages and disrupted commercial shipping globally.
Impact.
It was not an isolated incident. It was globally, and it was able to drive the Coast Guard and to have to push themselves as well to evolve and to change. When a year or two ago, I think 14 different maritime organizations alerted the Coast Guard that adversaries were beginning to disrupt shipboard navigations by interfering with signals. I think that was 2019. I'm pretty sure it was last year. So this is all to say that there's a big OT and IT link up here between IT systems and our dependence upon them to support critical business needs like global maritime and shipping needs, and the OT that supports their operations, and the ongoing digital transformation that we're seeing in that space just continues to grow the attack surface for a sector that we with energy have such a critical dependence on, not to mention food and agriculture and all of the other products that we've come to depend upon for the rest of our life.
Yeah, Nick, I threw that not intentional fastball because I knew you'd connect the dots on it. So phenomenal. And again, maritime is just one of many, but again, thinking about securing waterways, and you mentioned operational technology, also known as OT, and information technology is information technology, IT. Folks, this is the convergence that Nick referenced that we're living today. It's not one or the other. It's really whether you're thinking of distributed energy or you're thinking of a vehicle that talks to a sensor on a traffic light or a satellite. I like to talk about stories that I hear about growing crops because satellites are being beamed at the sun to grow in parts of the world that otherwise wouldn't be able to. It's pretty amazing and cool, but there's a lot of integration, and I think the word you've used a couple times is we want to make sure that the convergence and the integration of these systems are engineered properly. So we've talked a bit about that convergence high level, and again, folks, OT, IT, you could Google it and you'll see how it correlates to one another. I like to think of it where the internet needs the stuff, the ping power pipe that are under the ground and in the air and stuff we don't see, but it's all supposed to work. It's the IoT, the Internet of Things. Nick, I think about CESER though, in this whole working with labs and working with academic institutions and pushing that agenda around innovation. R&D is a big part of CESER, correct? Talk a little bit about some of the things that excite you, because here's why. Again, I think folks that if they were able to knock on your door every day would love to say, look what we have, a great toy to do the following. I always like to make sure in my conversations that if you get to meet Nick, hope you did some homework. I hope you understand his mission, because he is a great conversationalist, but I don't think he cares necessarily, much like I didn't as a CTO, about the shiny new toy, because I invest a lot in that. Can you speak to that partnership and the conversation and how important it is to have a dialogue with industry about your needs, your requirements, because CESER is collaborating a lot with industry today, giving out lots of money through the department to invent and innovate. So that's a big piece of, I think, accelerating the innovation ecosystem, whether it's to protect supply chain, Nick, or to kind of invent something new to protect waterways. Can you speak to that partnership ecosystem that's so key?
Yeah, I mean, so you hit it right on the nail right on the head. A lot of CESER's mission, well, a lot of the things I've talked to are kind of our operational side of our house. we do have a whole division within our office whose chief mission is to focus on that R&D work. I mean, CESER's R&D, we're investing in tools and technologies to help the energy sector kind of, prevent, detect, mitigate, and survive cyber incidents. But it's 100% dependent on continued collaboration between public and private partners to lead to the development of those cutting edge tools and be able to take advantage of the techniques and the methodologies that sometimes we don't have the expertise within government, or we're not thinking about the problem in that way. And everybody who comes to the table provides a unique perspective to the equation that allows us to think about the problem a little bit differently, so that we can come up with new ways to think about the solutions. Whether sometimes it's been innovative approaches to use existing technology and existing solutions, but to focus them on different problems, or it's creating something new together. As an example, we we can develop power grid components to enable power systems or ONG, oil and natural gas delivery systems, to detect a cyber attack automatically and shift to a more straightforward control system, part of a redundant architecture to sustain those critical functions while a cyber attack is isolated and while it's eradicated by that person that we have to have in the loop to be able to support that. So we engage formally through issuing things like our FOAs, our funding opportunity announcements.
Thank you. Thank you for the acronym.
Yep. So it just so again, pop up buggle.
Yes.
Did you know the government has another acronym? So those FOAs are for many of those energy sector led, university led, industry led R&D efforts to really help to empower energy sector companies to fully understand the strategies and the tactics that adversarial state and non-state actors are taking in targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. We partner with everybody under the sun, from very, very small shops and small individual research efforts at universities, all the way to partnerships that we have with General Electric to kick off cyber protection techniques and technologies, for things like natural gas pipelines and cyber resilience in that way. So the things that we hope to do is, again, we hope to engage in focused conversations around key problems that affect the energy sector today, and really help us to drive some of the increased visibility that we need cross sector. Those partnerships and those conversations are invaluable, and they really give us an opportunity to continue to focus our efforts in a space where we identify new opportunities to work through those funding opportunity announcements.
So thank you. And again, shout out to the department. Funding opportunity announcements, broad agency announcement, folks, go to grants.gov. There's tons of opportunity to collaborate. And maybe we'll get to that here in a quick minute, just to help as a Sherpa that you are. And that's a huge compliment, by the way, because again, folks, he's the principal deputy assistant secretary. When I think about just the collaborative nature that someone like Nick in the role that you're in, it's so significant. I can't emphasize enough that you don't have to meet with Nick to know what's on Nick's mind. So Nick, let's put on your vision hat here. I think this I always call it the symbiotic relationship of buy, sell, seek or solve. I say it quite often. I was sold too often, but I always is like, here's what I need. Don't take it prescriptively, but help me think out of the box. You mentioned thinking about problems differently. How do you feel, or what is an effective means other than, hey, check out our funding opportunity announcements? Where is sometimes that ideation opportunity? Is it, how do you, Nick Andersen, look at and rely on industry to help you or inform you on vulnerabilities or innovation that's out there that we want to accelerate? How do you, get to play visionary and art of the possible while at the same time trying to keep our grid secure and resilient?
So it's a lot of nights staying up and not getting much sleep and reading as many reports and studies as I can get my hands on. But that's not terribly exciting. We do have lots of opportunities though, where we have partners within this space, like our ESCCs and ONGSCCs, our electricity subsector coordinating councils, and
Yes.
our oil and natural gas subsector coordinating councils, where we specifically work with them to talk about what are some of these strategic problems that are facing the industry as a whole, and what are some of them that are affecting critical infrastructure more broadly. And those provide great opportunities to talk with folks that are constantly being inundated with the problems of the day, specifically for energy sector. But many of them, I mean, these are CEOs of companies that are having very broad risk conversations with business stakeholders and with communities. And a lot of times that provides us a great opportunity to make sure that it's not just those here with a DC presence that we're hearing from them because they're close, or those with an active outreach mechanism that we're hearing from. But it allows us to make sure that we're working with folks that are representing many different viewpoints, everything from the very large investor-owned utilities and the very large multinational corporations on the oil and natural gas side, down to the smaller public power and municipal utilities and the co-ops that are out there serving local-based communities. So I think it's a great opportunity to use fora like that as an opportunity to hear many, many different viewpoints.
So Nick, I think of the work you do with AFCEA. I'm involved a bit with some of these communities. So again, I'm speaking to the audience here that there's no shortage of opportunity to engage. Sometimes though, it's the message that I think facts tell, stories sell. Another one of my mentors, or at least he shared it with me, and so on and so on. I think it's this, again, tech, humanity, and culture all form an iron triangle. Why technology? How technology can support a mission, it's significant. Is there in your mind, and thank you, that was a lot of all these councils and working groups and engagements, is there a method or a protocol, whether it exists today or if you were able to say, boy, it would be nice if industry could share something that has been invented? Right? We give money out a lot for R&D purposes, but something might have been invented in a truck in a garage somewhere in the world that's benefiting. How do you think, or what would be a protocol that works, given that you seem to be working a lot with and having conversations with industry, leveraging the nonprofits to say, here's what we need, come help. But there is that, I think, from the other side, the optic on the outside, whether in or outside the Beltway, it's not that easy. And we still need that Sherpa mentality. What would you say to the community thinking, oh, this is all, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk?
Yeah, so when we have an outreach and a communications email right there on the CESER website.
Oh,
so
okay.
if you go to energy.gov and look for our little website right there, look for the CESER website. If you hit our office email there, we have opportunities that we call vendor days. And even in the world of COVID-19, we've held a couple of them virtually, and we use those as opportunities to say, okay, this is what so-and-so is reaching out to talk to us about. Let's grab these 5 or 6 people, get them all in a virtual room, like this together, and have the opportunities to go through, formal material, informal discussion, talk about the kind of the problem statements that they put together when they started working to develop whatever the product is or whatever their the proposed solution. Sometimes even if it's just ideas, where they're looking to have problem statements validated that this is something that we're looking at very broadly. And it's been everything from academic institutions that have wanted to chat about things that they're developing in labs to large, Fortune 500s to, smaller companies that are just getting their start, and everything in between. So those vendor days are run here. Again, this is an internal CESER thing. This is not more broadly for the department, but just here within CESER, we use this as an opportunity to engage with those that maybe have something they want to chat about, because we want to hear all ideas, no matter where they came from. It might be solving a problem or closing a gap for us that we didn't even think about its existence because it's such a complex, interconnected field.
Oh, well said. And that's good. I'm actually going to go check that out when we're done here. I mean, that's a great tip, especially in my world where I'm like, look, you may not see him speak. It's a COVID world we're living in, but there are opportunities to get your voice. And I think if I could be bold, it's do your homework too. We hear often it's one thing to say you have an idea, but how that idea ultimately can support the mission, whether it's CESER or some other component, it's key. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think to your earlier point, telling a story is really what works. Telling a story because you don't know if you don't know who you're interacting with on the other side of the video, whether it's someone who is a senior executive who's perhaps more focused on the natural hazards world, and maybe that's the world they came from, and cyber is a risk that they understand, but they're coming up to speed on, or vice versa. Maybe it's someone who's coming with it in our office from more of a cyber perspective, and they're trying to understand how you're trying to help with broader emergency response in local communities. So I think being able to tell a story helps you to kind of identify that problem statement, lay the foundation for what you're trying to do, and then be able to demonstrate how you're trying to solve that problem. I just think it helps to get everybody sort of on the same sheet of music.
Okay, so Nick, let me throw two topics as I sort of formulate the question, but supply chain and then also wearing your what excites you about the future. Okay, it could be grid, maritime, I don't, but we hear AI, machine learning. It's in everybody's sentence, right? 2009, it was cloud, go to the cloud. Now, leveraging
Yeah.
data, strategic asset, infrastructure. But I think about a word you used earlier, automation. We often hear about it's not about replacing the human in the loop. It's more, hey, let's automate what we can. Let's still make good decisions because the world has become digitally connected ubiquitously. And we need our phones. We want our phones. We're married to them. Sometimes my kids are like most. I have four, and it's like, can you just talk to me in the car? I'm sitting right here. You can look at that when, but supply chain is a term that I think people think about and go, yeah, it's a cyber thing. But it also is something that is impacting our world today, right? And it's sometimes seen as a negative, but you mentioned it. Can you speak to some of the technologies that are helping mitigate risk to supply chain that really you feel good about, as a taxpayer, as a citizen?
Yeah, I mean, so you mentioned a program that we have that we were working with our national lab community here a little earlier. You mentioned Citrix, and I didn't really speak too much about it, but Citrix is our cyber testing for resilient industrial control systems program. And just to break it down a little bit further, we have IT, and everybody thinks that's kind of common baseline. Everybody understands IT. Separate that out from the technology and the control systems that are kind of running the world around you that you don't see. It's your HVAC systems, it's your elevator systems, it's the integrated communications within your building that are helping it to run. It's the grid and all of our systems. Citrix is really focused on those industrial control systems that are the underlying technology that are supporting critical infrastructure. So we know that supply chain compromise and even cyber nexus supply chain compromise are kind of a recurring problem. The answer is twofold. It's testing, and it's that cyber informed engineering approaches like CCE that we talked about a little earlier. We have to have the ability to rapidly assess the exposure of critical infrastructure systems to those latest compromises. I think without getting into the details of what is certainly an evolving situation, as we continue to look at solar winds and what is going on there, plain and simple, that is a cyber supply chain compromise. As we continue to assess the impacts of that, we need to be able to have the ability to enumerate what is the totality of the problem, in particular within the embedded systems, within our control systems, our OT and our IoT. How do we really do that? Now, I think the thing that's going to be interesting is going to be how we share that information more
Yes.
broadly. So much of the research and the testing that's going to be done is going to be done by firms. It's going to be proprietary in nature. So much of this is going to be developed and implemented in silos of excellence. We really need to come up with the methodology for how we're going to break those down and share this information, for the good of the public, so people can make well-informed decisions to understand what their risk and potential exposure are.
Yeah, I like the word risk informed decisions. And again, supply chain is just to me, I think, Nick, another reason to say, hey, we can always improve. Bad things will happen. We address it. Technology, again, isn't the problem. But I think you mentioned information sharing. I know that there's some other great programs. I'm just going to mention a few. There's the Cybersecurity Risk Information Sharing Program, CRISP, a public-private partnership at the DOE that I think speaks to continued opportunity to engage and share what's happening. The Cybersecurity Capability Maturity Model, also known as C2M2, helping private sector owners and operators better evaluate their capabilities. We mentioned Citrix. I know that Coyote, Cybersecurity for Operational Technology Environments, and then Cyber Analytics Tools and Techniques 2.0 CAT. Folks, these are tools that and programs and methodologies. Maybe Nick, just briefly, those are just a few, but there are many, and maybe comment on some of the. Well, what do you think about the impact that these forums are having?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you call them forums, because they are technical capabilities, but there are industry groups behind every single one of these technical capability areas that's driving the development. It's helping to make sure that we're working against the right problems, and they're able to sort of give us the grade for how are these things going and how are the investments that the government is making in these capabilities. How's it making them more informed to be able to defend their infrastructure, and how's it helping to close some of these gaps that we have? I mean, we have. So you mentioned C2M2, and C2M2 is something that's also helping us to address maritime cybersecurity. We're working with NIST. We're working with NIST right now in particular, and their National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence to develop a maritime transportation system cybersecurity framework profile to support the development of an implementation guide to be a best practice for those liquid natural gas production, transportation, and storage systems throughout. And that's building on that DOE cybersecurity capability maturity model, or C2M2, and that has been very well received. And we've seen large segments of the energy sector use those as kind of internally developed cybersecurity scorecards, not to have something to send back to the government. DOE is not a DOE CESER is not a regulatory entity here. We just want to provide tools and technologies. We want to provide capabilities that are going to empower people to own their mission.
Yeah.
C2M2 is all about that. And then we have technical capabilities, like you mentioned, with Coyote, where we're developing specific tools to identify malicious actors in that operational technology environment through those industry-driven initiatives. And that's what Coyote and all of its tool development is about. Coyote is cybersecurity for operational technology environments as a pilot program for us, and it's really helping to bring together data and information between industry owner operators and the intelligence community. And then CRISP is sort of a bedrock program for us. It's been around for a little while. CRISP is our cybersecurity risk information sharing program. Really brings together energy sector owner operators and threat analysts using Pacific Northwest National Labs. Really helps to bring them together to discuss cyber threat information and the alerting data that they need, not just as a technical exchange to say, hey, this thing popped up, you should go look at this, but actually gives them a forum to be able to talk to one another, to develop that community of interest and be able to develop analytic best practices, and to be able to have that conversation and kind of form communities that can be mutually supporting during times of crisis.
Yeah, Nick, I mean, I think about how you just weave it all, this tapestry of, and I appreciate you. I didn't mean to say they weren't or were forums. I view them as whatever they are, they're opportunities for folks to come together and discuss and share. And I think a lot of it is, what are we doing with that information? So your leadership and those in CESER and others who've been part of it and continue to be, I think if you're watching this, folks, there's no excuse not to get involved, whether you're a utility, another agency, a small entrepreneur who wants to do business. So Nick, we're gonna finish up here with the classic Pete Tseronis, dots and bridges, if you will, parting shot. I like to leave with the audience the question that throughout they may be asking: why do I care? Why do I, or why should I care that we have an organization like CESER? Obviously, we care and are grateful to have a guy like Nick leading efforts and his team. But what would you want to leave with the audience based on the topics we addressed today so that folks can feel pretty darn good about the efforts within the DOE and CESER?
Sure. So, it's important to recognize that the threats to our energy infrastructure are continuously evolving, and oftentimes they're influenced here by the things we're seeing in the real world, by world events. There's a clear connection between international developments and things like state-sponsored cyber campaigns. So it's crucial to clearly understand how all of this comes together as an integrated risk picture, to understand how geopolitical risk can spawn malicious cyber attacks from our adversaries, and how we have to combine that geopolitical intelligence with traditional threat gathering techniques to help U.S. energy companies understand how and when they're going to be targeted by foreign adversaries like Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. And it extends beyond the cyberspace. But these countries in particular are continuously using any opportunity, most recently the pandemic, to attack individual companies and to target entire sectors. So, like I said earlier, energy security is national security. So right now we have to continue working with one another to understand the broad strategic risk, how it comes together and affects us here at home, and to understand how we can continue to build more resilient communities through addressing these national and economic security concerns.
Wow. Drop the mic. Amazing. Nick, thank you. I know we will chat again. I appreciate your time. We appreciate your time. Thank you for being on the consortium. I will be following up with you. We look forward to putting this together and sharing with the audience. And just, again, grateful for your leadership, for your passion for public-private partnership and service. And have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Pete.